we're about to learn the process, which underlies every brushstroke an artist ever made. It underlies every home run a baseball player ever hit. It underlies every time a person ever fell in love, any time anyone ever shed a tear. This process is called an action potential, or more specifically a neurological action potential. And before I go into my explanation, I have to say that I learned this from Madison College's General Anatomy and Physiology class. The text we used was The Essentials of Human Anatomy and Physiology by Elaine Mariab. But more than that, I want to thank my professor, Chuck Benton, who was an engaging professor. And I was very interested in the subject, and he gave a clear, good explanation, and I thank him for my understanding. So first of all, I want to talk about what a neuron looks like, and this is a primitive and crude drawing, granted, but it is an accurate representation of a neuron. And you can see it has a border all the way around, like any cell in the human body, and that border is called a cell membrane in animals. Plants have cell walls, animals have cell membranes. And the big important feature of a cell membrane is that it prevents charged particles from getting through. So in effect, if there is one more negative charge on either side, you have a battery. And since charged particles can't go through, you have a battery like this, an unplugged in battery, where there's positive and negative on either side, but they're separate, and there's not a way for the charge to go from positive to negative like it wants to. So that's the function of the cell membrane, is to keep charged particles on either side. These are called dendrites, and they take in stimulus. They respond to stimulus, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the physiology of the function. We're talking about the structure right now, the anatomy. This part here is the cell body. This is where you find the nucleus of the neuron and the organelles, which are those parts of the cell that are analogous to the organs of the human body. And this part here, this long tube extending outward, is called the axon. Where it begins is called the axon hillock. And then you'll see these wrappings around it, and those are called the myelin sheath. And there are little holes where there isn't that wrapping, and those are called the nodes of Revere. The myelin is a white substance. So if you're looking at a brain and you've heard the term gray matter, the gray matter is the cell body and the dendrites, and the white matter is the axons that's wrapped in myelin. That's why it's white and not gray. So the physiology of how this functions. Dendrites are sensitive to stimulus, and so when some particular stimulus comes out here, it can cause an opening of what's called a sodium channel. Sodium, being positively charged, can't normally get through the cell membrane. However, if a stimulus opens up a sodium channel, then sodium starts to flow through. The sodium channels themselves, they are voltage sensitive, so if a stimulus is sufficient to open the next sodium channel, then the following one will open. So the greater the stimulus, the more sodium flows through. And if it reaches its threshold, comes across the cell body, down here, down to the axon hillock. And so essentially, when that sodium channel opens, it's like plugging in the 9-volt battery. It allows the positively charged particles to go inside to the negatively charged cell, just like if you plugged in a battery or did this. I don't recommend you do that, but you can tell if the battery is hot that way because you'll feel the 9 volts of charge. However, what happens in an action potential, according to the Cambridge University affiliated website, The Naked Scientist, an action potential produces about 100 millivolts of voltage, which is about 1/90th of what a 9-volt battery produces. So, once sufficient stimulus has occurred, that sodium channels are opened all the way down to the axon hillock, the charge goes even faster down the axon hillock because the charge jumps across the myelin sheaths into the nodes of Revere. And according to the Athabasca University Psych Department's website, that is called saltatory conduction, the jumping across the myelin sheaths into the nodes of Revere. Once it goes all the way down here to the axon terminus, it releases a neurotransmitter. You might have heard serotonin. That's a neurotransmitter that has to do with regulating sleep. You might have heard of dopamine. That's a neurotransmitter that has to do with the brain's reward structure. Now, those neurotransmitters in turn create some sort of effect. They might affect other neurons. They might affect muscles. They might cause a muscle to contract. They might affect feelings of affection or aggression. Basically, any emotion, any thought, and any action that you've ever had, that any human being has ever had, this is the process that is the control mechanism by which all those processes unfold. Anytime someone shed a tear, anytime someone has yelled at another person, anytime someone swung a baseball bat, this happened first. This is a precursor to all human thought, all human feeling, and all human emotion. Thank you.
Turn it on and show yourself.
Or at least your upper left eye.